Dad, I need your help. I'm in serious trouble. Those words from my son, Quentin, made me transfer my entire $18,500 Coast Guard pension without hesitation, money I'd saved over 43 years of keeping lighthouse beams burning through Atlantic storms. He said his mother-in-law needed emergency surgery, his voice trembling with what I believed was desperation. 3 days later, I opened the Maritime Antique Collector newsletter and froze at the glossy photos of Quentin and Serafina raising whiskey glasses in a Highland castle, their faces glowing with joy from the Scottish vacation I'd unknowingly funded. 43 years of guiding ships away from dangerous rocks had taught me to recognize treacherous waters. Time to wreck his. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The salt air still carried autumn's bite that October morning when everything changed. I stood in my kitchen, the same one where my Martha used to hum while kneading bread, watching the harbor through windows she'd cleaned 1,000 times. The lighthouse I'd tended for 4 decades rose like a white sentinel beyond the docks, its beacon dark in the daylight but eternal in my heart. Retirement hadn't dulled the pride I felt, seeing those red brick quarters, knowing I'd guided countless souls safely home. My coffee had grown cold in the mug Quentin gave me for Father's Day 3 years back. "World's greatest dad," it read the letters now, mocking me from across the kitchen table. The phone call still echoed in my mind, his voice trembling with what I'd believed was desperation. "Dad, I'm in trouble," he'd said, the connection crackling like a storm at sea. "The lens auction I told you about, it's happening today. This 1,847 Fresnel lens from Cape Hatteras, it's the missing piece for my maritime equipment collection. If I can secure it, the museum contract I've been chasing will finally come through." I'd listened to every word, my weathered hands gripping the receiver. Quentin's business had always struggled selling refurbished nautical equipment to collectors and small museums. He'd inherited my love for maritime history, if not my steady paycheck. 18,500, he'd continued. "I know it's everything you've saved, but Dad, this could change everything for Sarah and the kids. We could finally get ahead." The mention of my grandchildren Emma and little Jack had sealed it. I'd walked to the bank that same afternoon, my Coast Guard pension book tucked under my arm like a life preserver I was about to throw away. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, had asked twice if I was certain about the wire transfer. Family emergency, I'd told her, signing away 43 years of service with a pen that felt heavy as an anchor. 3 days passed in peaceful ignorance. I'd even felt proud imagining Quentin's success, picturing Emma and Jack's faces when their father's business finally prospered. The lighthouse beam swept across my windows each evening, a rhythm that had comforted me since childhood when my own father kept these same lights burning. Then the newsletter arrived. The New England Maritime Antique Collector landed in my mailbox with its usual quiet thud, a quarterly publication I'd subscribed to since Martha's passing. Something to keep me connected to the world I'd served. I'd poured fresh coffee, settled into my reading chair, and opened to the feature story, "American Collectors Discover Scottish Heritage." My blood turned cold as North Atlantic water. There, spanning 2 glossy pages, were photographs from a Highland castle tour. Quentin and Serafina stood before ancient stone walls, raising crystal glasses filled with amber whiskey. Their smiles blazed with joy I hadn't seen in years. Serafina wore a new cashmere coat, her pottery-stained hands now manicured and gleaming with rings I'd never noticed. Quentin's face glowed with satisfaction, his arm wrapped possessively around his wife. The caption read, "Massachusetts couple enjoys exclusive castle tour during Scottish antiquing expedition." The newsletter slipped from my weathered hands like a ship losing its mooring. Highland Castle photos scattered across my lighthouse kitchen floor like broken promises. The memory crashed over me like a rogue wave, pulling me back 3 days to that phone call that changed everything. I'd been polishing the brass compass Martha gave me for our 25th anniversary, the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen windows when the phone rang with the urgency of a distress signal. Dad, Quentin's voice cracked through the receiver, trembling like rigging in a gale. "Dad, I need your help. I'm in serious trouble." My hands stilled on the compass, its needle pointing true north, while my world began to spin. "What's wrong, son? Are you hurt? Is Serafina okay?" "The kids were fine physically," he said, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "But Dad, I'm about to lose everything. You remember that maritime equipment business I've been building, the one with the museum contracts?" I remembered. Quentin had been chasing those contracts for 2 years, trying to establish himself as a serious dealer in nautical antiques. I'd been proud of his determination to honor our family's maritime heritage, even if his business acumen never matched his passion. There's this auction today, he continued, his words tumbling like debris in a storm surge. A genuine 1847 Fresnel lens from Cape Hatteras Light. Dad, this isn't just any piece. It's the centerpiece the Mystic Maritime Museum has been seeking for their new exhibit. If I can secure it, they'll sign the exclusive supply contract I've been negotiating. The excitement in his voice felt genuine, infectious even. How much are we talking about? 18,500. The number hit like a depth charge. I know it's everything you've saved from your Coast Guard pension, but Dad, this is our chance. Serafina's been working double shifts at the pottery studio, and the kids need so much. Emma's starting high school next year, and Jack needs those speech therapy sessions. My heart clenched at the mention of my grandchildren. Emma with her bright eyes and Martha's stubborn chin. Jack still struggling with words, but brilliant with his hands, always building something when he visited. The auction house requires immediate wire transfer, Quentin pressed. Full payment within hours of winning the bid. Dad, I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. You know I wouldn't. I stared at the compass in my hands, its brass surface reflecting decades of careful polishing. Martha had inscribed it, to my steady navigator, may you always find your way home. But home felt different now, emptier since she'd passed, and family was all the navigation I had left. Quentin, I said slowly, are you absolutely certain about this opportunity, Dad? I've never been more sure of anything. This lens will change our lives. I promise you every penny will come back to you with interest. The museum contract alone is worth $60,000 annually. The conviction in his voice anchored my decision. 43 years of faithful service, of guiding ships safely to harbor, of putting duty before personal gain. All of it had led to this moment where I could guide my own family to safety. I'll be at the bank within the hour, I told him. Dad, I love you. You're saving us. Those words echoed now as I knelt on my kitchen floor, gathering the scattered newsletter pages, each Highland Castle photo, a testament to my foolishness. I remained on my knees for longer than pride should have allowed. The Highland Castle photos spread around me like evidence of a shipwreck. Each image burned with their joy, their careless laughter echoing across an ocean I'd paid for. The cashmere coat Serafina wore probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Quentin's satisfied grin was the face of a man who'd never known want, never felt the weight of choosing between heating oil and prescription medications. 43 years. 43 years I'd climbed those lighthouse stairs in howling gales and bone-deep cold guiding strangers safely home while my own family plotted to steal my anchor. My knees creaked as I rose, each joint protesting like old rigging under strain. The compass still lay on the kitchen table where I'd abandoned it during that damned phone call. Martha's inscription caught the afternoon light. To my steady navigator. Some navigator I'd turned out to be sailing straight into my son's reef of lies. I gathered the newsletter pages with hands that trembled not from age, but from something I hadn't felt since Martha's funeral, pure undiluted rage. The kind that builds slowly in a man's chest like pressure in a boiler. Dangerous and demanding release. My fingers found my phone muscle memory, dialing Quentin's number before rational thought could intervene. It rang once, twice, then clicked to voicemail. His voice, smooth as calm seas, invited me to leave a message. Quentin, it's your father. My voice came out steady, controlled the same tone I'd used to radio Coast Guard stations during emergencies. I saw the newsletter. The Highland Castle photos. Call me back. Now. I set the phone down with deliberate care the way I'd once secured equipment before a storm. No shouting, no accusations. Not yet. A lighthouse keeper learns patience, learns to wait for the right moment to signal danger. The kitchen felt smaller now, suffocating with the weight of betrayal. I walked to the window overlooking the harbor where lobster boats bobbed like corks on the incoming tide. Those fishermen understood honest work, understood the difference between earning and taking. They'd rise before dawn tomorrow, same as they had for generations, pulling their living from the sea with calloused hands and weathered determination. Not like my son, who'd learned to fish in different waters. The lighthouse beam would sweep across these windows again tonight, just as it had for over a century. Automated now, no longer needing a keeper's steady hand, but still faithful to its purpose. Still warning ships away from dangerous shores. I thought of Emma and little Jack, innocent casualties in their parents' deception. Did they know their Scotland adventure was bought with their grandfather's sacrifice? Or had Quentin spun them another story, another lie, wrapped in parental authority? My phone remained silent on the table, Quentin's cowardice as predictable as the tides. He'd seen my message, no doubt, but calling back would require explanations. He couldn't give apologies. He didn't possess the courage to offer. The afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the harbor in shades of amber and regret. But something else stirred in my chest now, something harder than hurt and sharper than disappointment. Purpose. Cold, clear purpose, like a compass needle finding true north. If Quentin thought this old keeper would fade quietly into his retirement, he'd miscalculated worse than a captain, ignoring storm warnings. The phone rang at 8:30 that evening, just as the lighthouse beam began its nightly sweep across my windows. I let it ring twice, 3 times, watching the caller ID confirm what I already knew. Quentin had finally found his courage, or perhaps Serafina had forced his hand. "Hello, Dad." His voice carried none of the desperation from 3 days ago, replaced now with cautious wariness, like a sailor testing uncertain waters. "Quentin," I kept my tone level, the same authority I'd used to command respect on Coast Guard vessels. "I trust you received my message." A pause stretched between us, filled with the weight of Highland Castle photos. And $18,500 stolen dollars. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what exactly?" The words came out sharper than I intended, decades of maritime discipline, cracking under pressure. "Explain how your mother-in-law's emergency surgery became a Scottish vacation. Explain how the lighthouse lens auction turned into whiskey tastings in Highland castles. You don't understand." His voice shifted, taking on that patronizing tone I'd heard him use with Emma when she questioned his decisions. The business opportunity was real, but it fell through at the last minute. Serafina had been working so hard, and we'd already arranged time off, so you decided to steal my retirement fund for a vacation. It wasn't stealing. The shout crackled through the phone like static in a storm. "It was a loan, Dad. We were going to pay you back with interest once the next deal came through." I stood at my kitchen window, watching the harbor lights twinkle like false beacons. "A loan requires asking permission, son. What you did was theft." "Jesus, Dad, you're being dramatic. It's not like you need the money right now. You've got the house, your Social Security. That money represented 43 years of service." My voice dropped to the quiet intensity I'd once used to cut through hurricane winds on the radio. 43 years of climbing lighthouse stairs in blizzards, of guiding ships safely home while their families slept peacefully in their beds. That wasn't just money, Quentin. It was my legacy. Another pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something uglier, more familiar. "Look, I'm sorry you're upset, but you're blowing this out of proportion. We had a great time, the kids loved Scotland, and we'll pay you back when we can. That's what families do. They help each other. Help each other." I repeated the words, slowly tasting their bitterness. "Is that what you call lying to me about emergency surgery? Is that what you call posting photos of your Highland vacation while I worried about your financial ruin? We didn't post anything for you to see." He stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. "No, you didn't. You thought this old lighthouse keeper was too stupid to read the Maritime Antique Collector. You thought I'd never find out about your Scottish castle tour, your whiskey tastings, your cashmere coats bought with my sacrifice." "Dad, please. I raised you better than this, Quentin. Your mother and I taught you about honor, about earning what you have. We taught you to respect your elders, to value family trust above personal gain. Times are different now." His voice cracked with frustration. "You don't understand the pressures we face, the expenses, the competition. Emma needs college funds, Jack needs therapy, Serafina's studio barely breaks even, and you thought robbing your father was the solution." The lighthouse beam swept across my windows again, steady and reliable, a rhythm that had comforted me through 43 years of storms. But this storm was different. This one had blown up from within my own family. "I'm hanging up now," Quentin said, his voice cold as North Atlantic water. "When you're ready to be reasonable, call me back." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the dial tone and the growing certainty that my son had learned to navigate by different stars entirely. Dawn broke gray and cold over the harbor, matching the weight in my chest as I walked the familiar pier toward Murphy's bait and tackle. The lobster boats bobbed at their moorings like sleeping gulls, their captains already 3 hours into their workday, hauling traps with the same steady rhythm their fathers and grandfathers had mastered. I needed that rhythm now. Needed the comfort of men who understood the difference between earning and taking. The bell above Murphy's door announced my arrival with its familiar brass chime. Inside, the morning coffee crowd had gathered, weathered faces above flannel shirts, hands wrapped around steaming mugs, discussing trap counts and weather patterns with the easy authority of men who'd spent their lives reading the sea's moods. Cliff Tommy Rossini looked up from his position at the counter, his thick fingers wrapped around a mug that read, "World's Best Grandpa." At 68, he still pulled traps with his grandson, teaching the boy what his own father had taught him decades ago. "Haven't seen you down here in a while? How's retirement treating you?" The question hit harder than intended. How was retirement treating me? My son had just stolen my pension fund for a Scottish vacation, hung up on me when confronted, and shown less remorse than a tourist caught littering on the beach. Could be better, Tommy. I accepted the coffee Murphy slid across the counter, its warmth spreading through my palms like an old friend's handshake. Family troubles. The conversation around the counter quieted with the subtle attention of men who'd learned to read weather changes in a person's voice. These weren't gossips or busybodies. They were harbor brothers who'd pulled each other's boats to safety in storms, who'd shared fuel when tanks ran empty, who understood that sometimes a man needed to talk and sometimes he needed silence. "That boy of yours still struggling with his business?" asked Frank Delacroix, a retired Coast Guard coxswain who'd served under my command 20 years ago. His eyes held the same steady concern I remembered from rough seas and emergency rescues. I took a long sip of coffee, buying time to find words that wouldn't sound like self-pity. He borrowed money from me under false pretenses. $18,500. My entire pension savings. The silence that followed was heavier than fog rolling in from the Atlantic. Tommy set his mug down with deliberate care, the ceramic clicking against the counter like a judge's gavel. Borrowed or took Frank's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd investigated maritime accidents, who understood the difference between negligence and malice. Took, called crying about emergency surgery for his mother-in-law, needed immediate wire transfer. Turns out they were planning a Scottish vacation all along. Son of a bitch. The words came from Murphy himself, a man who rarely cursed despite 40 years of dealing with frustrated fishermen. Sorry, Cliff, but that's what he is. Taking advantage of his father like that. Tommy nodded slowly, his weathered face creased with something between anger and sadness. My grandson asks me for $20 for gas. He tells me it's for gas. These kids today, they think lying is just another form of navigation. What are you going to do about it? Frank leaned forward, his Coast Guard training evident in the way he approached problems. Identify the threat, assess resources, formulate response. I stared into my coffee, seeing my reflection waver in the dark surface like a lighthouse beam on rough water. I don't know yet, but I'm not letting this slide. The men around the counter exchanged glances, and I felt something I hadn't experienced since Martha's funeral. The solid presence of people who understood honor, who valued their word above their comfort. Whatever you decide, Tommy said quietly, you've got friends here. The Lighthouse Museum stood at the end of Harbor Street, like a keeper's quarters frozen in time, its white clapboard siding and red brick foundation identical to the lighthouse I'd called home for 4 decades. I'd avoided the place since retirement, unable to face the exhibits that cataloged my life's work as historical artifacts, but today I needed the comfort of familiar territory. The brass bell above the entrance chimed as I stepped inside, breathing in the scent of old wood and maritime history. Display cases lined the walls, filled with brass instruments, ship logs, and photographs of lighthouse keepers who'd stood watch before automation made us obsolete. My own photograph hung near the entrance part of a display titled "The Last Generation of Keepers." Clifford Vandenberg, as I live and breathe. I turned to find a woman approaching from behind the information desk, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her eyes sharp with intelligence behind wire-rimmed glasses. She moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command her navy blazer and sensible shoes, suggesting both professionalism and practicality. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" I asked, though something about her bearing seemed familiar, like recognizing a fellow mariner by their stance on deck. "Prudence Weatherby, but most folks call me Prue." She extended a firm handshake, her grip speaking of competence and reliability. "I'm the museum curator here, retired from the county courthouse after 35 years as a paralegal. I've been hoping to meet you properly since I took this position." The courthouse connection clicked into place. I'd seen her during various Coast Guard administrative hearings over the years, always impeccably prepared, always asking the right questions with surgical precision. "You worked with Judge Morrison's office," I said, remembering her reputation among the maritime law community. "I testified in several cases where you handled the documentation." "Indeed, your testimony was always thorough, always honest." Her smile carried warmth beneath its professional polish. I remember thinking the Coast Guard was lucky to have someone who understood that details matter, especially when lives and livelihoods hang in the balance. We walked slowly through the museum, past displays of lighthouse lenses and navigation equipment, our conversation flowing with the easy rhythm of 2 professionals who'd served in parallel worlds of maritime law and lighthouse. "Keeping. What brings you here today?" Prue asked, pausing before a display of Coast Guard rescue equipment. "You've been avoiding us since your retirement ceremony." I was beginning to think you'd sworn off anything connected to lighthouse work. I studied the rescue gear, remembering countless nights when that equipment had meant the difference between life and death for sailors caught in storms. I'm having some family difficulties. Needed to be somewhere that made sense. Her expression shifted subtly professional instincts, recognizing the weight behind casual words. Family difficulties can be more treacherous than any storm at sea. Sometimes they require the same careful navigation. My son stole $18,000 from me, I said the words, emerging without conscious decision. My entire pension savings. Lied about needing it for emergency surgery, used it for a Scottish vacation instead. Prue stopped walking, her full attention focused on my words, with the same intensity I'd seen her bring to complex legal documents. That's not family difficulty, Clifford. That's fraud. The word hung between us like a distress signal, clear and unmistakable in its implications. I don't know what to do about it, I admitted, feeling the weight of uncertainty that had driven me to seek comfort among maritime artifacts. Well, Prue said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in legal proceedings, I might have some thoughts on that subject. Prue's home office occupied the converted sunroom of her Cape Cod cottage, its walls lined with legal references and maritime history books that spoke to a lifetime of parallel interests. She'd cleared her dining table of its usual papers, replacing them with a yellow legal pad, the bank receipt I'd brought, and 2 steaming mugs of coffee that smelled like determination and possibility. Let's approach this systematically, she said, settling into her chair with the focused intensity I remembered from courthouse proceedings. In legal terms, what your son did constitutes fraud by false pretenses. He obtained money through deliberate deception, misrepresenting the purpose for which it was needed. I watched her write FROD, false pretenses, at the top of the legal pad, her handwriting precise as a navigator's chart. The word looked different in her careful script, less emotional and more factual, like weather data that could be analyzed and acted upon. The evidence is substantial, she continued, making notes as she spoke. You have the bank transfer record showing the exact amount and date. You have his recorded voicemail requesting money for emergency surgery. Most importantly, you have documentary proof of their actual whereabouts, i.e., the newsletter photographs from Scotland. Is that enough for prosecution, I asked, though part of me still recoiled from the idea of sending my own son to court. More than enough for civil recovery, certainly. Criminal prosecution would be up to the district attorney, but with this level of documentation. She paused, studying my face with the perceptiveness that had made her invaluable in legal proceedings. But I suspect you're more interested in getting your money back than seeing Quentin in handcuffs. She was right, of course. 43 years of lighthouse keeping had taught me the difference between justice and vengeance, between making things right and making people suffer. What would civil recovery involve, I asked. We'd file a lawsuit for fraudulent misrepresentation demanding return of the full amount, plus interest and legal fees. The beauty of civil court is the lower burden of proof. Heaven, we only need to show it's more likely than not that fraud occurred, which, with this evidence, is virtually certain. Prue's pen moved across the legal pad, creating what looked like a battle plan. More importantly, civil action would freeze any joint assets you might share with Quentin. Do you have any shared accounts, property deeds, anything that could be attached to secure repayment? The question hit me like a rogue wave. We have a joint savings account I set up when he was in college. I never removed his name after he graduated. There might be 3,000 or 4,000 in it. Perfect. Her smile carried the satisfaction of a prosecutor finding the key evidence. We can petition the court for asset attachment, freezing that account pending resolution. It won't cover your full loss, but it shows we're serious about recovery. She leaned back, studying her notes with professional satisfaction. There's another angle we should consider. Public pressure. Fraud cases like this often benefit from community awareness, especially in small towns where reputation matters. You mean making it public? I mean ensuring the community understands what happened. Your son runs a business that depends on trust and reputation. Maritime equipment dealers need credibility with museums and collectors. If word spreads about his fraudulent practices, she didn't need to finish the sentence. In a community like ours, where handshake deals still mattered, and a man's word was his bond, Quentin's reputation would sink faster than a boat with a cracked hull. When do we start? I asked. Tomorrow morning. I'll make some calls, get the paperwork started. By the end of the week, your son will understand that stealing from a lighthouse keeper was the biggest navigation error of his life. The courthouse clock struck 9 as Prue and I climbed the granite steps that had witnessed decades of legal reckonings. She carried a leather briefcase with the same confidence I'd once carried emergency flares, tools of the trade. ready for deployment when lives hung in the balance. Today it was my financial life we were fighting to save. Remember, this is just the first salvo, Prue said as we approached the clerk's office. Filing the complaint and freezing the joint account will get Quentin's attention, but the real pressure comes when he realizes his business reputation is at stake. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, accepted our paperwork with the practiced ease of someone who'd processed countless human dramas. Civil fraud complaint against Quentin Vandenberg, she read aloud, her voice neutral as a weather report. Asset attachment, request for joint savings account, ending in 4,729. My heart clenched hearing my son's name spoken in legal terms, but I signed where Prue indicated each signature a step away from the man who'd raised Quentin to be better than this. The judge will review the attachment request this afternoon, the clerk explained. If approved, the bank will freeze the account by close of business today. 30 minutes later, we sat in the office of Patricia Kowalski, the bank manager who'd known me since Martha and I opened our first checking account 40 years ago. Her expression mixed professional concern with personal sympathy as she reviewed the court order. "I'm sorry it's come to this, Cliff," she said, her fingers dancing across her computer keyboard with practiced efficiency. "The joint account shows a current balance of $3,847. Once I enter this freeze order, neither you nor Quentin will be able to access these funds until the court resolves your case." "How long does that usually take?" I asked. "Civil fraud cases. With this level of documentation, most settle within 60 days rather than go to trial. Nobody wants their financial laundry aired in public court records." Patricia's phone buzzed as she processed the freeze order. She glanced at the caller ID and looked up with raised eyebrows. "It's Quentin. He must have tried to access the account." "Let it go to voicemail," Prue advised. "Let him wonder what's happening." We walked back to Prue's car in comfortable silence, the weight of action taken, replacing the burden of helpless anger. The lighthouse beam had swept across my windows for 43 years, warning ships away from dangerous shores. Today, I'd finally started sending my own warning signals. My phone rang as we reached the harbor. Quentin's name flashed on the screen, his third call in 10 minutes. "Answer it," Prue said. "But keep it brief. Let him know this is business now, not family drama." I accepted the call, putting it on speaker. "Hello, Quentin. Dad, what the hell did you do?" His voice crackled with panic and outrage. "I can't access our joint account. The bank says it's frozen pending legal action." "Legal action, Dad? What's wrong with you?" "I filed a civil fraud complaint," I said, my voice steady as a lighthouse beam. "You stole $18,500 from me through false pretenses. I want it back with interest." "You can't be serious. I'm your son, yes you are, and I raised you better than this. Dad, please, we can work this out. Don't drag lawyers into family business." "You made it legal business when you committed fraud, Quentin. Talk to your attorney." I ended the call and looked out at the harbor where honest fishermen were returning with their morning catch, their holds filled with the fruits of legitimate labor. The Harbor Chronicle occupied a narrow storefront between Moody's Fish Market and a shop selling nautical antiques, its windows displaying the kind of local news that held small communities together. Editor Sarah Chen looked up from her cluttered desk as Prue and I entered, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to sharp interest as she recognized us. "Clifford Vandenberg," she said, rising to shake hands. "I've been hoping to interview you about the lighthouse automation project. The town's losing so much maritime history." "Actually, we're here about a different kind of story," Prue said, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "Something that speaks to the importance of family trust and community values." Sarah's journalistic instincts sharpened visibly as Prue outlined our situation, her pen moving across a notepad with the same precision I'd once used to log weather conditions. She asked careful questions, avoiding anything that might compromise the legal case, while focusing on the broader implications. "So you're saying a local business owner defrauded his elderly father out of his entire pension savings?" Sarah's voice carried the controlled outrage of someone who understood how such stories resonated in tight-knit communities. $18,500, I confirmed. "My entire Coast Guard retirement fund, taken under false pretenses for what he claimed was a medical emergency." "And you have documentation." Prue slid copies of the bank transfer and newsletter photographs across the desk. "Bank records showing the transfer plus photographic evidence of their actual whereabouts during the supposed emergency." Sarah studied the Highland Castle photos with the focused attention of a navigator reading storm warning. "These are from the Maritime Antique Collector, the same publication that covers his business dealings." "The irony wasn't lost on us," Prue said dryly. "I can run this as a feature on elder fraud. Sarah said, already sketching the article's framework. We'll keep it general enough to protect your legal case, but specific enough to raise community awareness. Local elder fights back against family fraud. Something that educates people about the warning signs. 3 days later, the Harbor Chronicle hit the streets with our story prominently featured on page 3. Sarah had crafted it carefully, focusing on the broader issue of elder financial abuse, while using our case as a compelling example. The article included a sidebar about recognizing fraud warning signs and resources for victims. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing before I'd finished my morning coffee. Tommy Rossini called first, his voice tight with anger. Cliff, I just read the Chronicle. That boy of yours ought to be ashamed of himself, taking advantage of his father like that. The calls continued throughout the day, Harbor friends expressing support, church members offering prayers, even strangers who'd heard about the article calling to share their own stories of family betrayal. The Lighthouse Museum reported increased visitors asking about the keeper who fought back. But the most significant call came from Marcus Del Vecchio, who owned the maritime supply store where Quentin occasionally did business. Cliff, I've been dealing with your son for 3 years, Marcus said, his Brooklyn accent carrying across the phone line like a warning bell. Always seemed like a straight shooter, but after reading that article, I'm thinking maybe I should review some of our transactions more carefully. That's your decision, Marcus. Yeah, it is. And I'm deciding that anyone who'd steal from his own father probably isn't someone I want to do business with. Word gets around fast in this community, Cliff. Your boy's reputation is taking on water faster than a boat with a cracked hull. As evening settled over the harbor, I stood at my kitchen window, watching the lighthouse beam sweep across waters that had carried my family's story to every corner of our small community. The beam was automated now, no longer requiring a keeper's hand, but its message remained unchanged. Dangerous waters ahead, navigate with caution. Quentin was about to learn that some storms you can't outrun. The Harbor Veterans Hall buzzed with an energy I hadn't felt since Martha's funeral, but this time the community had gathered not to mourn but to fight. Tommy Rossini stood at the front of the room, his weathered hands gripping the podium like a ship's wheel in heavy seas. 43 years, Cliff Vandenberg kept our lights burning, Tommy's voice carried to every corner of the packed hall. 43 years he guided our boats safely home while storms tried to claim them. Now his own families tried to wreck him on the rocks, and by God, we're not going to let that stand. The crowd's murmur of agreement rolled through the room like a tide. I sat in the front row, overwhelmed by faces I'd known for decades, fishermen who'd relied on my lighthouse, Coast Guard colleagues who'd served alongside me, neighbors who'd watched me tend the beacon through countless storms. We're taking up a collection, announced Betty Morrison, the hall's treasurer, her voice sharp with righteous indignation. Not charity. None of us would insult Cliff that way. This is community justice. We're going to make sure he doesn't suffer financially while the courts sort out this mess. Frank Delacroix stood from his seat near the back. I've been making calls to maritime suppliers up and down the coast. Word's getting out about Quentin Vandenberg's business practices. 3 companies have already dropped him as a vendor. The satisfaction in Frank's voice was unmistakable. In the maritime community, reputation traveled faster than storm warnings, and once lost, it was nearly impossible to recover. My phone vibrated against my leg, another call from Quentin that I let go to voicemail. He'd been calling hourly since the article appeared, his messages growing increasingly desperate as the business consequences mounted. The Harbor Business Association voted this morning, added Marcus Del Vecchio, rising from his seat with the authority of a man who'd built his reputation on honest dealing. Quentin Vandenberg is no longer welcome at our monthly meetings. We can't have someone who defrauds family members representing our community's business interests. A woman I didn't recognize stood near the middle of the room. I'm Janet Phillips from the Elder Rights Advocacy Group. We'd like Mr. Vernerman, Vandenberg's permission to use his case in our educational materials. Too many seniors suffer financial abuse in silence. The meeting continued for another hour, each speaker adding another layer of community support, another consequence for Quentin's actions. By the time Tommy called for adjournment, a fund had been established, business relationships severed, and a network of advocacy activated that would ensure this story reached far beyond our small harbor town. As people filed out, many stopped to shake my hand or offer quiet words of support. The Lighthouse Museum's guest book, I learned, had filled with visitors asking about the keeper who fought back. Tour guides were incorporating my story into their presentations about maritime values and community strength. Walking home along the harbor path, I found Prue waiting on my front porch, her expression mixing satisfaction with concern. "How are you holding up?" she asked. This level of community support can be overwhelming. It's more than I expected, I admitted, settling into the porch chair beside her. Part of me feels guilty about Quentin facing such consequences. That's the father in you talking, Prue said gently. But remember, he created these consequences with his choices. The community is simply responding to his actions with their own choices, to support honesty and punish deception. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Quentin. This time I answered. Dad, please, his voice cracked through the speaker. You have to call off your friends. My business is collapsing. Serafina's pottery studio lost 3 major contracts today because of the association with my name. I didn't call anyone son. I simply told the truth. The phone rang at 8:30 that evening just as the lighthouse beam began its familiar sweep across my window. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the young voice that answered my hello was unmistakably familiar. Grandpa Cliff Emma's voice trembled like rigging in a storm, barely 14 years old, and caught between loyalty and truth. It's me. I'm calling from my friend's phone because Dad took mine away. My heart clenched like a fist around an anchor chain. Emma, sweetheart, are you okay? Where are you? I'm at Madison's house. Mom and Dad are fighting again, really bad this time. Dad's been yelling about you all week, saying terrible things, but Grandpa... Her voice broke, and I heard her take a shaky breath. I know what really happened. I heard them talking when they thought I was asleep. I sank into my kitchen chair, the weight of family division settling on my shoulders like fog rolling in from the Atlantic. What did you hear, honey? Dad was bragging to Mom about how easy it was to get the money from you. He said you'd believe anything if he mentioned us kids needing help. The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for days. He called you gullible, Grandpa. He laughed about it. The lighthouse beam swept across my window again, steady and unwavering, while my world tilted on its axis. Hearing Quentin's betrayal described by my granddaughter's innocent voice cut deeper than any legal document or newspaper article ever could. Mom tried to stop him from taking the trip. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. She said it was wrong to lie to you, but Dad said you'd never find out, and it wasn't really stealing because family should share everything. Emma, I need you to listen to me carefully, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. None of this is your fault. The problems between your father and me have nothing to do with you or Jack. But everyone at school is talking about the newspaper article. Madison's mom showed it to her, and now everyone knows our family is. She paused, searching for words. Broken. The word hit like a rogue wave. Broken. Was that what I'd done to my family? Had my fight for justice shattered something that could never be repaired? Grandpa, I love you, but I love Dad too, even though he did something terrible. Is there a way to fix this? Can families come back from something like this? I stared out at the harbor where the lighthouse beam continued, its eternal vigil, warning ships away from dangerous shores, while guiding them towards safe harbor. Some storms you weather together. Others tear families apart like hurricanes splitting ancient trees. What would you do in Cliff's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. I don't know, sweetheart, I admitted, the honesty tasting bitter as salt spray. But I promise you this. Whatever happens between your father and me, you and Jack will always be my grandchildren. You'll always have a place here, always have my love. Can I come visit you soon? Without Dad knowing. The question hung between us like a distress signal, and I realized that winning against Quentin might mean losing something far more precious than $18,000. The lighthouse beam swept across my windows once more, and I wondered if some navigation errors create damage that no amount of justice can repair. We'll figure something out, I promised, though I wasn't sure how to keep that promise without making the family fracture even wider. Dawn broke gray and heavy over the harbor, matching the weight in my chest, as I walked the familiar pier toward Murphy's. Emma's words from the night before echoed in my mind like foghorns in a storm. Can families come back from something like this? I needed the wisdom of men who'd weathered their own family squalls. The morning coffee crowd was smaller than usual, but the faces were familiar. Weathered veterans of maritime life who'd learned that some storms require different navigation than others. Tommy Rossini looked up as I entered, his experienced eyes reading the trouble in my expression like weather signs on the horizon. Rough night, he asked, sliding a steaming mug across the counter. I settled onto the worn bar stool, wrapping my hands around the coffee's warmth. My granddaughter called, 14 years old, caught between loyalty to her father and knowing what's right. She asked if families can survive something like this. The conversation around the counter quieted with the respectful attention of men who'd raised their own children through stormy waters. Frank Delacroix set down his mug with deliberate care. My boy went through a phase in his 20s, Frank said quietly. Borrowed money he couldn't pay back, made promises he couldn't keep, nearly destroyed his marriage before he straightened out. Sometimes family members have to hit bottom before they find their way back to the surface. But did you ever take legal action against him? I asked. Different situation, Frank admitted. But I'll tell you this. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices. Protecting them from those consequences doesn't help them grow. Murphy wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, his movements betraying decades of listening to harbor conversations about family duty and difficult choices. My father always said the lighthouse doesn't apologize for warning ships away from dangerous rocks. It just keeps sending the signal steady and true. Tommy nodded slowly, his weathered hands cradling his coffee mug. You raised that boy with good values, Cliff. If those values are still in there somewhere, this crisis might be what brings them back to the surface. But if they're not, he shrugged with the philosophical acceptance of a man who'd seen storms claim vessels despite every warning. What about Emma and Jack? I asked. They're innocent in all this. Kids are resilient, said a voice from the corner booth. Old Captain Morrison, retired from the Merchant Marine, looked up from his newspaper. Raised 6 children through 2 divorces and a bankruptcy. You know what they remember most. Not the fights or the financial troubles. They remember who was consistent, who kept their word, who showed them what integrity looked like when the seas got rough. The weight of their collective wisdom settled around me like a familiar coat. These men had weathered family storms, business failures, and personal crises that would have sunk lesser vessels. Their perspective carried the authority of experience. The question isn't whether you're right to seek justice, Tommy said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd commanded fishing crews through decades of dangerous waters. The question is whether you can live with yourself if you don't AT. Your granddaughter needs to see that actions have consequences, that stealing from family isn't acceptable just because it's family. I stared into my coffee, seeing my reflection waver like a lighthouse beam on choppy water. The harbor stretched beyond Murphy's windows, where honest fishermen were already 3 hours into their workday, earning their living with calloused hands and unwavering determination. She also needs to know her grandfather stands for something, I said finally. There's your answer, Frank said simply. The courthouse steps felt different this time, worn granite, that had witnessed countless seekers of justice over the decades. Prue walked beside me, her briefcase containing the evidence that would either vindicate my fight or expose me as a vindictive old man pursuing his own son through the legal system. Remember, this is just a preliminary hearing, she said, as we approached the heavy oak doors. Judge Patterson will review our evidence and decide whether to grant summary judgment or proceed to trial. With documentation this clear, I expect we'll walk out with a court order for full restitution. The courtroom smelled of old wood and legal precedent, its high ceilings echoing with the whispered conversations of lawyers and litigants. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, feeling the weight of 43 years of honest service behind every word I was about to speak. Judge Patterson, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, reviewed our filing with the methodical attention of a navigator plotting a course through treacherous waters. Her gaze moved from the bank records to the newsletter photographs with the same precision I'd once used to calculate lighthouse beam angles. Mr. Vandenberg, she said, looking up from the documents, please tell the court in your own words what happened. I stood, my voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Your Honor, my son Quentin called me, claiming his mother-in-law needed emergency surgery. He said he needed $18,500 immediately, or she would die. I transferred my entire Coast Guard pension savings that same day. And what did you discover about the true nature of this emergency? 3 days later, I found photographs in a maritime newsletter showing my son and his family on vacation in Scotland. They were touring Highland castles and drinking whiskey while I believed I was saving a woman's life. Judge Patterson studied the newsletter photographs, her expression revealing nothing but professional assessment. Mr. Quentin Vandenberg, you were served with this complaint 3 weeks ago. Do you have legal representation today? From the defendant's table, Quentin rose slowly. He looked smaller than I remembered, his usual confidence replaced by the hollow appearance of a man whose reputation had been systematically dismantled by his own community. No, Your Honor. I can't afford an attorney right now. My business has suffered significant losses recently. I see. And do you dispute the plaintiff's version of events? Quentin's eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for a moment I saw the boy I'd taught to tie nautical knots and read weather patterns. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who'd learned to navigate by different stars. No, Your Honor. I don't dispute the facts. But I never intended to defraud my father. I planned to pay him back once my business improved. Judge Patterson's pen moved across her legal pad with the decisive strokes of someone accustomed to cutting through deception to reach truth. Intent to repay does not negate the fraudulent nature of the initial transaction, Mr. Vandenberg. You obtained money through false pretenses regardless of your future intentions. She looked up from her notes, her gaze encompassing both sides of the courtroom. The evidence presented is overwhelming and undisputed. The plaintiff has documented proof of wire transfer, recorded voicemail containing false claims, and photographic evidence contradicting the defendant's stated purpose for the funds. The gavel's sound echoed through the courtroom like a lighthouse foghorn cutting through storm clouds. I hereby order the defendant to make full restitution of $18,500 plus interest, calculated at the statutory rate plus plaintiff's legal fees. Payment is due within 30 days. Justice, I realized, sounded exactly like a ship's bell marking safe passage through dangerous waters. The phone calls started the morning after the court hearing, each one another nail in the coffin of Quentin's business reputation. I sat in my kitchen watching the harbor through windows that had witnessed decades of honest maritime commerce, while the consequences of my son's choices rippled through the business community like storm surge. Marcus Del Vecchio called first, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a man whose instincts had been vindicated. Cliff, I wanted you to know. I terminated my contract with Quentin's company this morning. Can't do business with someone who defrauds his own father. Words getting around the maritime supply network faster than a distress signal. The calls continued throughout the day. Patricia Kowalski from the bank reported that Quentin had attempted to secure a business loan to pay the court-ordered restitution, but his application had been denied due to recent legal complications affecting creditworthiness. The banking community talks Cliff, she explained with professional discretion. Court records are public, and fraud judgments don't exactly inspire confidence in loan committees. By afternoon, the Harbor Chronicle had published a follow-up article about the court victory, complete with details about the restitution order and legal fees. Sarah Chen's reporting was precise and factual, but the implications were devastating for anyone trying to maintain business relationships built on trust. Tommy Rossini stopped by that evening, his weathered face creased with something between satisfaction and concern. Ran into Quentin at the marina today, he said, settling into my kitchen chair with the weight of unwelcome news. He was cleaning out his storage unit, loading maritime equipment into a rental truck. Looked like a man abandoning ship. Did he say anything? Asked if I thought you'd be satisfied now that his business was ruined. Tommy's eyes met mine with the steady gaze of a man who'd weathered his own storms. I told him you didn't ruin his business. He did that himself, the moment he decided lying to family was an acceptable business practice. The lighthouse beam swept across my windows as Tommy spoke its rhythm, unchanged, despite the human drama playing out in its shadow. Some constants endured regardless of family betrayals or business failures. The Mystic Maritime Museum called this afternoon, I said, sharing news that had surprised even me. They heard about the court case and wanted to clarify that they never had any pending contracts with Quentin's company. Apparently that was another fabrication. Tommy shook his head with the disgust of a man who'd built his reputation on handshake deals and honest work. Lying about museum contracts, stealing from his father, what other corners was he cutting? The answer came the next morning in a call from Janet Phillips at the Elder Rights Advocacy Group. Mr. Vandenberg, we've received 3 more reports from elderly community members who believe they may have been defrauded by maritime equipment dealers. Your case has encouraged others to come forward with their own stories. The implications hit like a rogue wave. Quentin's fraud might not have been an isolated incident of family betrayal, but part of a broader pattern of targeting vulnerable seniors in the maritime community. We're coordinating with the district attorney's office, Janet continued. Your successful civil case has provided a template for others seeking justice. You've become something of a symbol for elder rights in our community. I stared out at the harbor, where honest fishermen were returning with their evening catch, their holds filled with the fruits of legitimate labor. The lighthouse beam continued its eternal sweep, warning ships away from dangerous shores while guiding them towards safe harbor. Justice, I was learning, had consequences that rippled far beyond individual cases. The call came at 7 a.m, jarring me from sleep like a distress signal cutting through fog. Seraphina's voice crackled through the phone, stripped of its usual polished confidence and raw with desperation. Cliff, please, we need to talk. Her words tumbled out in a rush, like water through a cracked hull. I know you're angry with Quentin, and you have every right to be, but this has gone too far. We're losing everything. I sat up in bed, the lighthouse beam still sweeping across my bedroom windows in its eternal rhythm. Serafina, it's 7 in the morning. I haven't slept in 3 days. Her voice broke, and I heard her take a shaky breath. The pottery studio lost all its major contracts after the newspaper articles. Nobody wants to do business with the wife of someone who defrauds elderly family members. We're behind on the mortgage. Emma's school is asking about unpaid tuition and Jack's speech therapy sessions. We can't afford them anymore. The weight of unintended consequences settled on my chest like anchor chain. I'd sought justice for myself, but the collateral damage was spreading to innocent victims, my grandchildren. Cliff, I tried to stop him from taking that money, she continued, her voice gaining strength through confession. I told him it was wrong, that lying to you about emergency surgery was cruel and stupid. But he said business was slow, that we deserved a vacation after all the stress that you'd never find out. But you went along with it, I said, my voice steady as a lighthouse beam cutting through her excuses. Yes, I did, and I've regretted it every single day since. But Cliff, Emma, and Jack don't deserve to suffer for our mistakes. They worship you. Emma cries every night because she thinks you hate us all. The mention of my granddaughter's tears hit like a rogue wave, threatening to wash away the foundation of righteous anger I'd built over the past month. But 43 years of lighthouse keeping had taught me the difference between genuine distress and false signals. What do you want from me, Serafina? Come to dinner tonight. Please, let Quentin apologize properly, face to face. Let us figure out a payment plan that doesn't destroy the children's lives. They need their grandfather, and honestly, I think you need them too. I stared out at the harbor where the morning fishing fleet was already 3 hours into their honest work, pulling their living from the sea with calloused hands and unwavering determination. The lighthouse beam had stopped its sweep, no longer needed in the growing daylight, but its message remained constant: navigate carefully, avoid dangerous shores. I'll come, I said finally, but not for Quentin, and not for you, for Emma and Jack. Thank you, she whispered, relief flooding her voice like tide returning to harbor. 6 o'clock. Different now. And Cliff Quentin's different now. The business failure, the community rejection, the legal judgment, it's broken something in him. He's not the arrogant man who stole from you. He's scared and ashamed and desperate to make things right. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the harbor come alive with another day of honest commerce. The lighthouse stood silent in the morning light, its work done until darkness fell again. But some beacons I was learning cast shadows as well as light. Tonight would determine whether my fight for justice had guided my family toward safe harbor or driven them onto the rocks. The house I'd helped Quentin buy 15 years ago looked smaller now, its cheerful yellow siding faded and the front garden showing signs of neglect. I stood on the porch for a moment, gathering the same steady resolve I'd once summoned before climbing lighthouse stairs in hurricane winds. Emma answered the door, her 14-year-old face lighting up despite the family crisis that had brought me here. Grandpa Cliff. She threw her arms around me with the fierce loyalty of youth, and I felt the first crack in my armor of righteous anger. Hello, sweetheart, I said, holding her close and breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Over her shoulder I saw Jack peeking around the corner, his 8-year-old eyes wide with uncertainty. The dining room table was set with Serafina's best china, the same pattern Martha and I had given them as a wedding gift. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 stolen money paying for Highland castles, while my wedding gift held their desperate attempt at reconciliation. Quentin entered from the kitchen, and I barely recognized the man who'd hung up on me 6 weeks ago. He'd lost weight, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that seemed to have shrunk under the weight of consequences. His eyes, once sharp with confidence, now held the hollow look of a sailor who'd lost sight of shore. Dad, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. We sat in uncomfortable silence, while Serafina served pot roast and mashed potatoes, the kind of comfort food families shared during better times. Emma chattered nervously about school, filling the void with teenage observations about teachers and friends, while Jack pushed peas around his plate with the focused attention of a child, avoiding adult conversations. Finally, Quentin set down his fork and looked directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived. I need to say something, he began, his voice cracking like a boy's. Dad, I stole from you. Not borrowed, not took a loan. I stole $18,500 from my father, who raised me alone after Mom died, who taught me right from wrong, who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. His hands trembled as he continued. I lied about Serafina's mother needing surgery. I lied about the lighthouse lens auction. I lied about everything because I wanted to take my family on a vacation I couldn't afford, and I thought, God help me, I thought you were too trusting to ever find out. Emma's fork clattered against her plate, her young face registering shock at hearing her father's confession spoken aloud. I destroyed my business, my reputation, my children's respect, and worst of all, I broke the trust of the man who taught me that honor matters more than comfort. Tears rolled down his cheeks like rain on weathered siding. Dad, I know you can never forgive me, but I'm begging you not to let my children pay for my sins. I studied my son's broken face, seeing echoes of the boy I'd taught to tie bowline knots and read storm clouds. The lighthouse keeper in me recognized genuine distress when I saw it. This wasn't manipulation, it was the sound of a man who'd finally hit bottom. The court ordered restitution, I said, my voice, carrying the authority of 4 decades guiding ships through dangerous waters. But courts don't heal families. That requires different navigation. I looked at Emma and Jack, their young faces reflecting hope and fear in equal measure. Here are my terms. I looked around the table at faces that carried my bloodline, my legacy, my love, and my profound disappointment. The lighthouse keeper in me understood that some storms require more than weathering. They require new navigation charts. First, I said, my voice carrying the quiet authority I'd once used to command Coast Guard crews, you will pay every penny of the court-ordered restitution plus interest plus legal fees. Not because the court demands it, but because stealing has consequences that money can't erase, but money must address. Quentin nodded, his face pale but accepting. I'll get a job, Dad. Any job. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to. Second, I continued, you will write letters of apology to every business owner who terminated contracts because of your fraud. Not asking for their business back. That bridge may be burned forever, but acknowledging that your actions damaged their trust in the maritime community. Serafina's pottery-stained hands gripped her napkin. Cliff, some of those business owners, won't even take his calls. Then he'll write the letters anyway and leave them at their offices. Apologies aren't about receiving forgiveness, Serafina. They're about accepting responsibility. Emma looked up from her untouched dinner. Grandpa, does this mean you don't hate us anymore? The question hit like a depth charge exploding through my carefully constructed authority. I reached across the table and took her small hand in my weathered one. Sweetheart, I never hated any of you. I hated what your father did. I hated being lied to and stolen from, but I never stopped loving my family. I looked directly at Quentin. Love and trust are different things. Love is unconditional. Trust must be earned back, one honest action at a time. What does that mean for us? Quentin asked, his voice barely audible. It means Sunday dinners are restored, but only if you're working honestly to pay your debts. It means I'll attend Emma's school events and Jack's speech therapy sessions, but you'll explain to them why Grandpa's money went to Highland Castles instead of their college funds. Jack looked up from his mashed potatoes. What's Highland Castles? The innocence in his question reminded me why I was here, why family mattered more than perfect justice. It's where your parents went on vacation, buddy. A very expensive vacation that Grandpa paid for by mistake. Third, I continued returning to my terms. You will volunteer 20 hours a month at the Elder Rights Advocacy Group. You will help other seniors avoid the fraud you committed against me. You will turn your mistake into education for others. Quentin's eyes widened. You want me to tell strangers how I defrauded my father. I want you to understand that your crime wasn't just against me. It was against every elderly person who trusts their family members with their financial security. You'll help Janet Phillips educate the community about elder fraud warning signs. The lighthouse beam swept across the dining room window, its rhythm unchanged despite the human drama playing out in its glow. Some constants endured regardless of family betrayals or reconciliations. Finally, I said, my voice softening as I looked at my grandchildren. Emma and Jack will spend every other Saturday with me at the Lighthouse Museum. Not as punishment, but as education. They'll learn about their maritime heritage, about the difference between earning and taking, about why their grandfathers spent 43 years guiding ships safely home. Emma's face brightened for the first time since I'd arrived. Really, we can learn about the lighthouse, really. And when you're old enough, maybe you'll understand why some beacons cast shadows as well as light, but their purpose remains constant. To guide people safely through dangerous waters. I stood from the table, my terms delivered, my boundaries established. These aren't negotiable conditions, Quentin. They're the price of rebuilding trust. Spring arrived at the harbor with the promise of renewal, painting the Lighthouse Museum grounds in shades of hope I hadn't felt since Martha's passing. I stood in the museum's main gallery watching Emma carefully polish a brass compass, while Jack arranged maritime artifacts with the focused attention of a boy discovering his heritage. Grandpa, this compass is from 1847, the same year as the lighthouse lens. Dad lied about. Emma said, her 14-year-old voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. Do you think it ever guided ships that your lighthouse helped save? The question struck me with its innocent profundity. It's possible, sweetheart. Compasses and lighthouses work together. One shows the direction, the other warns of dangers. Both are needed for safe navigation. 6 months had passed since that difficult dinner, 6 months of watching Quentin slowly rebuild what his lies had destroyed. True to his word, he'd taken a job at the marina cleaning boats and maintaining equipment for $12 an hour. Honest work that left his hands stained with salt and effort rather than deception. Prue entered the gallery carrying 2 steaming coffee mugs, her presence bringing the same steady comfort I'd once found in lighthouse routines. Our friendship had deepened over the months, built on shared values and the kind of understanding that comes from weathering life's storms with dignity intact. The restitution check arrived this morning, she said, handing me a mug. Quentin's ahead of schedule on his payments. Another 6 months and he'll have paid back every penny plus interest. I nodded, unsurprised. The marina owner, Captain Rodriguez, had mentioned Quentin's work ethic during our coffee conversations at Murphy's. Working sunrise to sunset, never complains, treats every boat like it belongs to his own father, Rodriguez had said. Whatever demons he was fighting, looks like he's winning. How's his volunteer work going? I asked Prue. Janet Phillips says he's their most effective educator. When he tells seniors about fraud warning signs, they listen because he speaks from experience. He's helped prevent at least 3 scams this month alone. Emma looked up from her polishing. Dad cried last week when Mrs. Henderson thanked him for saving her from losing her Social Security money. He said helping people felt better than any business deal he'd ever made. The lighthouse beam would begin its evening sweep, soon automated, but eternal warning ships away from dangerous shores while guiding them toward safe harbor. Some storms, I'd learned, clear the air for better weather. Grandpa Jack said, carefully, arranging ship models in chronological order, will you teach me to tie sailor knots, like you taught Dad? Of course, buddy. But first let me teach you why each knot matters, why sailors develop them, why some hold under pressure and others fail when you need them most. Prue smiled, understanding the deeper lesson I was offering. Trust, like rope work, required proper technique, consistent practice and knowledge of which knots held firm when storms tested their strength. My phone buzzed with a text from Quentin's Sunday dinner at 5. Seraphina's making pot roast. The kids want to show you their lighthouse project from school. I typed back, I'll bring dessert. See you at 5. The Lighthouse Museum closed at sunset, but the lessons it taught about navigation, perseverance, and guiding others safely home continued long after the doors were locked. Some beacons I'd discovered shine brightest after the darkest storms. 1 year to the day after Quentin's desperate phone call had shattered my trust. I stood in the same kitchen where I'd discovered the Highland Castle photographs, but everything had changed. The lighthouse beam swept across windows that now framed a different life, one built on truth rather than deception, on earned trust rather than naive faith. Prue moved around the kitchen with comfortable familiarity, preparing dinner for a celebration that marked not just Quentin's final restitution payment, but the completion of a family's journey from betrayal to redemption. Her presence had filled spaces in my life I hadn't realized were empty, bringing laughter and companionship to rooms that had echoed with solitude since Martha's passing. The lighthouse tour business is exceeding all our projections, she said, checking the roast in the oven. 12 bookings this week alone, mostly families wanting to learn about maritime heritage. Emma's becoming quite the tour guide. Through the window, I watched Quentin's truck pull into the driveway, followed by Seraphina's pottery studio van. They'd both rebuilt their businesses from the ground up, earning back trust one honest transaction at a time. Quentin's new marine maintenance company specialized in honest work and fair prices, while Seraphina's pottery had found new markets among customers who valued authentic craftsmanship over flashy marketing. Emma burst through the door first, her 15-year-old energy filling the kitchen like sunrise over the harbor. Grandpa Cliff Dad has the check, the final payment. And Jack learned 3 new sailor knots this week. Jack followed more quietly, his 9-year-old hands proudly displaying a bowline knot he'd tied with the precision I'd once demanded from Coast Guard trainees. Look, Grandpa, it holds tight even when you pull really hard. That's perfect, buddy, I said, examining his work with the serious attention such achievements deserved. A bowline saved my life once during a storm. Good knots matter when the weather gets rough. Quentin entered last, carrying an envelope with the solemnity of a man who understood the weight of completion. He'd aged in the past year, but it was the aging of someone who'd carried heavy burdens and emerged stronger, not the hollow exhaustion of defeat. "Dad," he said, extending the envelope with hands that bore the calluses of honest work, "this is the final payment. $18,500 plus interest, plus legal fees. Every penny accounted for, earned through legitimate work." I accepted the envelope but didn't open it. The money had never been the point. The principle was what mattered. The understanding that actions have consequences. That family trust was sacred, that some things couldn't be bought with Highland Castle vacations or desperate apologies. "Thank you," I said simply. "But more importantly, thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be." Serafina wiped her eyes with a dish towel, her pottery-stained hands trembling with emotion. "Cliff, I know we can never fully repay what we took from you. Not just the money, but the trust, the peace of mind, the family harmony. But we're going to spend the rest of our lives trying." The lighthouse beam swept across the kitchen window again, steady and eternal warning, ships away from dangerous shores while guiding them toward safe harbor. Some storms, I'd learned, clear the air for better weather. The evening sun painted the harbor in shades of gold and redemption, as I stood on the Lighthouse Museum's observation deck with Prue beside me, her hand warm in mine. Below us, the harbor bustled with the honest commerce of fishing boats returning with their daily catch, their holds filled with the fruits of legitimate labor. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Prue said, watching Quentin's marine maintenance truck pull into the marina parking lot. He moved with purpose, now his shoulders straight with the dignity that comes from earning respect rather than demanding it. "He's become the man you always knew he could be." I nodded, thinking of the journey we'd all traveled, from betrayal to redemption, from broken trust to earned forgiveness. The lighthouse beam would begin its evening sweep soon, automated, but eternal warning, ships away from dangerous shores while guiding them towards safe harbor. Some storms, I'd learned, clear the air for better weather. Emma and Jack raced up the lighthouse stairs, their laughter echoing in the spiral stairwell, like music from a better world. At 15 and 9, they carried our family's maritime heritage in their young hearts, understanding now why their grandfather had spent 43 years keeping lights burning for strangers who needed safe passage home. "Grandpa Cliff," Emma called out, slightly breathless from the climb, "Mrs. Phillips wants to know if you'll speak at the Elder Rights Conference next month. She says your story has inspired 12 other families to come forward about fraud." The request didn't surprise me. Justice, I'd discovered, had consequences that rippled far beyond individual cases, creating waves of awareness and protection that reached shores I'd never imagined. "What do you think, Prue?" I asked, ready to become the face of elder advocacy. She laughed, the sound carrying across the harbor like wind through lighthouse rigging. "I think we've got more adventures ahead of us than behind us." Clifford Vandenberg. The lighthouse beam began its nightly sweep, casting its warning and welcome across waters that had carried my family's story from betrayal to redemption, from broken trust to earned forgiveness. Maritime heritage wasn't just about ships and storms. It was about navigating life's treacherous channels with honor intact, about standing firm when currents tried to sweep you off course, about being a beacon for others when darkness threatened to overwhelm them. Quentin appeared at the top of the stairs, no longer the arrogant man who'd stolen from his father, but someone who'd learned that true wealth came from honest work and family trust. Behind him, Serafina carried a picnic basket, her pottery-stained hands now symbols of authentic craftsmanship rather than desperate schemes. "Sunday dinner on the lighthouse deck," she announced. A family tradition worth starting. As we gathered around the picnic table, 4 generations united by lessons learned and trust rebuilt, I realized that some storms don't destroy. They reveal what's strong enough to survive, what's worth rebuilding, and what truly matters when the winds finally calm. The lighthouse beam swept across our family's celebration, steady and eternal, a reminder that some beacons cast shadows as well as light, but their purpose remains constant, to guide people safely through dangerous waters toward the harbor of home. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.